Hey guys, welcome to church. We are so glad you joined us today. And today is a very special day. Happy Father's Day to all of you dads out there. We love you, we honor you, you are so important. So we hope you are having the best day. Tonight, we have a special treat for you. Pastor James will be speaking. It's going to be so good. So again, thanks for tuning in. And wherever you're watching, please take a picture and tag us. We'd love to know you're watching with us. Okay, let's go ahead and get right into the message.
If you guys don't know, I meet with the men once a month, and we got some really nice people that cook food for us, and the guys are low maintenance. I was like, look, man, if you want to just get some McDonald's hamburgers and stack them on a tray, I'm good with that. I don't think any of the guys would care, but they go way over the top and cook really good stuff, and it's good every time. So we do that once a month, but I try to use that the same way. You know, when Jesus is leaving the earth and he's talking to his disciples, he says, go out and train disciples, make disciples all throughout all the nations, right? This is like the Great Commission. He leaves us with that task, and that's something I try to do with the men. And the reality is that, you know, you maybe say, why? And that's because fathers really matter. That's the reality. And today's Father's Day, so I'm going to talk a little bit, and I just want to read you some stats. And I realize that there's a lot of other factors that could go into stuff like this, but these are from the U.S. Census. It's 1 in 4 kids are brought up in fatherless homes, which is kind of crazy. That's 25%. But there were 14,000 fatherless children incarcerated last year. If you're from a fatherless home, you're 47% more likely to grow up in poverty. Children from fatherless homes account for 63% of youth suicides, 71% of high school dropout, and 90% of all homeless and runaway kids are kids from fatherless homes. So fathers matter. It's important. And the kind of lifestyle that they're living is a big deal. And one of the things I talked to the guys a couple months ago was we were kind of going over all the way back to the beginning, the story of Garden of Eden, and I was kind of telling them how, you know, if you read Genesis, you'll see that God, you know, he sets Adam up to be responsible for the garden, and he puts all this stuff in motion for him, grows plants for him, has animals, all that, and then he even, you know, is like, you know, it's not good for man to be alone. I'm going to give him a companion. So he creates Eve and puts Eve with Adam, and he really kind of left Adam responsible for that. Well, then he goes back up to heaven, I guess, and they sin. They eat of the tree he told them not to. And so the first thing God does when he comes back is he says, Adam, where are you? He doesn't say, Eve, where are you? He says, Adam, where are you? You're the one I left responsible for this. And Adam does what I think a lot of guys are guilty of, is he immediately blames his wife. And then not only that, but he blames God in the process. He goes, the woman that you gave me made me do this. And so, you know, that's a challenge to all the guys out there. And I just wanted to touch, that was a long thing that we went down. But the idea was that God put you over the garden, and it's your job to keep the snakes out, right? And that's what he wants from you. And he's asking you, like, hey, man, I left you with this space. What are you doing? So what does that look like for us in modern day? Well, it's your family, right? Like, your job is to protect your family and keep the snakes out of the garden and look over things like that. And you're ultimately responsible. You know, I've heard a lot of guys say, you know, my wife's really the church one, you know? And that's okay. That's not a bad thing. But, you know, the reality is that God's holding us as the head of the household responsible for our family's spiritual condition and where they're at with God, right? Yeah. So it's an important position. Now let me tell you some good news. There's another survey that found that if a child is the first person in a household to accept salvation and follow God, there's a 3.5% probability that the rest of the house will follow the influence of the kid. And if it's the mom, it's 17%. But if it's the dad, there's a 93% chance the rest of the family will follow. Yeah, so it's an important role. It's a lot of responsibility, but it's a very important role. And so, you know, the question then is like, okay, well, if we're called to be Christ-like and be a good example for our families, then how did Christ act, you know? Because sometimes I think it's easy to just go out and do your own interpretation of what you think that looks like. And if you're not careful, you can start to like weaponize the Bible and use it against people. So it's important that you're grounded the right way and that you have a really good understanding of what God's actually asking for you to do as a father. And And it's hard too, because a lot of times guys, you hear stuff in church, and this is why sometimes I think guys put it off, like, oh, that's something that my wife does. It's not really for me, because you get this idea that the world is really kind and nice, and you should always turn the other cheek and be empathetic all the time. And that doesn't make a lot of sense in the guy world sometimes, because you go right back into the job place, and every other word's the F word, and people are yelling at you all the time, and you have to constantly confront things and be hard, And it's really hard to go with this mentality of like, oh, I'll just lay back and let them do whatever, because that's what the church told me to do. And so I wanted to bring some clarity to that, and I'm going to kind of anchor on this. Pastor Steph's been talking to you guys about embracing Jesus, and so I'm going to do my best to kind of tag onto that, because And I'm going to use this verse as kind of like my core scripture for today, but it's 1 John 1:14. It says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us." And this is talking about Jesus. "And we have seen his glory, glory as the Son from the Father." And this is the important part I want to highlight, is full of grace and truth. And so I want to talk a little bit today about the truth side of that. And if you'll notice for a minute, it's saying that Jesus didn't just have grace sometimes and truth sometimes. It says he was full of both all the time. And if I can make sense out of this a little bit, think of grace as a married couple, right? And this is if you guys know Steph and I at all, you'll know that she's sort of known as the one that leans a little bit more towards grace. She's very empathetic, and she always wants to assume the best about everybody. It doesn't matter what it is. If you see somebody get punched in the head, she's like, they didn't mean it. They're a good person, I swear. And I'm like, I don't know, he looked like he just hit him. She's very empathetic. So she always leans towards grace by default. That's just her nature. And I'm more on the truth side of things, And so, for example, one night we were driving by the movie theater, and we're just driving along the stop sign, and I looked down the road, and these guys were just fist fighting in the middle of the road with their shirts off. And she immediately starts going, they're fighting. And I'm like, yeah, they probably need to fight it out, And she's like, no, pull the car over and get out and go stop them. I'm like, so just to give you an idea, it's grace and truth, right? And so I'm going to tell you a little bit, knowing that about me, I'm going to tell you a little bit of my story. So I was a pretty small kid, and I grew up in like the rough part of town, or maybe it was normal, I don't know. I couldn't tell the difference when I was a kid. I just know that I got bullied a lot. And I didn't like that, just like nobody likes getting bullied. And so I was into movies too, and I watched this movie back in the 80s, and I got myself a new role model, and that role model was, throw that first one up, okay? Yeah, this dude, when I was 8, this dude was bad. And, the reason is because, he had bullies too, and so I related to his story, getting picked on all the time, and the whole movie's about his journey that he's got to go on to kind of like learn self-defense and take care of himself, when he needs to, so that he doesn't get bullied. And he ends up fighting in this tournament. You can show the next one. Yeah, okay, so the infamous crane kick, if you don't know, this is the final moment where he gets to go in public and beat up his bully, right? Like, that's the whole premise of this story. So you can take down the next. So some years went by. Like I said, I was an 8-year-old, so I used to practice karate. I even my mom tried to take me and sign me up. We had a friend that had a dojo, and I'm like an 8-year-old. So they're like, all right, you ready to learn karate? And I'm like, I don't think I need to. I've seen the Karate Kid. You know what I mean? So I don't know what you could even teach me at this point. And so a couple years went by. I'm like, I don't know, 12, 14 at this point, and I was at my grandpa's house, and he had the VHS of this movie, and I decided to give it a try because I thought the cover looked awesome. And it turned out to be my next role model. And you can throw that next one up. Yeah. Okay? If you don't know who that is, that's Frank Dukes, right? And that's a movie called Bloodsport. And he didn't take nothing off nobody. And that's like, all right, I need to look like that guy. I need to start hitting the gym. But anyway, he went to this tournament, right? And he has to go, to get in the tournament. Show this next one. So, he goes to Hong Kong to fight in this tournament. He's like an arrogant American. They don't like him. So they're like, all right, to get in, you have to break these bricks, but For you have to break the bottom brick only. So, of course, like in true 80s montage fashion, they play this music, and he hits the bricks, and only the bottom one explodes. And so he's allowed to get in the tournament. And you can show the next slide. So this is the kumite, where he gets to fight his aggressor, and this dude in the red shorts is basically the bully in this movie, that kind of picks on everybody, and he ends up actually killing his friend. So he wants vengeance on this dude for killing his friend. And that was like my path up until, I was like 15, let's say. And so I really wanted to be that guy, and I got my chance. And a lot of things happened. I'm really skipping way ahead in the story. But when I was like 22, I had my next door neighbor owned a karate dojo, and he just shows up at my front door one day, and I barely talked to him. Shout out to Mr. Garza, if you're watching, you might be. But he just came over one day randomly and was like, "Hey, I'm having a black belt tournament. Do you want to fight in it?" And I was like, "Yeah, for sure." He's like, "Hold on, I haven't finished telling you what it is." I'm like, "It doesn't matter. I'll do whatever. You want me to break a brick? I'll break the bottom one. What do you want? I'm in." And so he's like, "Okay, well, it's a black belt tournament, and you don't have any kind of training. Are you okay with that?" And I was like, "Yes, I'm okay with that." So I got to fight in my own kumite, and that was a lot of fun. But this is where the story gets a little darker, because I kept going with this idea of, it started off as, I really wanted to fight against bullies. I mean, that was really my intention. I did not like seeing people get taken advantage of, and I had, started out small, but by then I had grown much larger, and so I had gotten to the point in my life where I didn't have to really do anything I didn't feel like doing technically, right? If I listened to somebody, it was because I chose to, not because I had to. Because I could technically make them do whatever I wanted with force, and that's not healthy, right? So this went from being a really good thing of, I just want truth, and I don't want anybody to get bullied, including me, and so I'm going to try to protect people. That's my thing. But, if it's not measured well, it just slowly turned into me just imposing whatever I felt like was justice. Does that make sense? Instead of actually going, what is real justice, I would just make it up for myself. I don't know, how's that work out for me? If I like it, I do it. If I don't, then I make you do it, right? And so I got in a fight one night, and I got in lots of fights that I shouldn't have been in, and thank God he was a part of my life, because I could be probably dead. But one night it was late, I got out of the car, and some guy starts talking trash, saying cuss words to me, and I warned the guy, "Hey man, get back in your car, you shouldn't talk like that, especially to me, I will hurt you." And he keeps talking, so I walked over and hit him in the mouth, and blood went everywhere, and I ended up in the back of a cop car, handcuffed with assault charges, because the guy didn't like that. But, I felt at the time, and I was frustrated, because I felt like, you shouldn't be allowed to say whatever you want. There should be consequences. And I know there's probably people in this room that feel like that. You run your mouth, you get hit. That's how it works. But, that's not healthy. It's not good. And I ended up frustrated, like I said a minute ago, that key word there. Even though I had gotten what I thought was justice, technically, it ended in frustration. And there's a saying that says, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. And it was this idea that, you always retaliate and do what you think is fair. And it's from this position of like, that's not right. I'm going to do something about it. But as to finish that story, I ended up going to court in Houston. And when I got up to the judge, God must have been in the cop car that night, let me put it that way. There must have been an angel there, because when I got up to the judge, and the judge was like, "How do you plead?" I said, "Guilty." And they said, the district attorney catches it and goes, "Hold on, isn't it true that in the state of Texas you have 90 days to prosecute?" And they're like, "Yes." And he's like, "Okay, well then my client's free to go." And the judge is like, "Why?" He's like, "Because the date says May 2nd, 1981. That's my birthday." So the cop accidentally wrote my birthday in the spot of the date of offense. So they said, "You're free to go." So I did a little dance with the district attorney, and then I bolted out of there. And I was like, all right, it's time for me to make some life shifts here, because this isn't working out. And I'm thinking in my head I'm doing the right thing by teaching people a lesson. But like I said a minute ago, and I'm going to talk about this word in a minute, but it kept leading to frustration. So as I aged and got married, had kids, I decided to work at a church. Well, that's a pretty big shift from coming out of bar fights all the time to working at a church. So what's that look like? Well, I can say that I probably need a new role model, right? Let's start there. So I started really looking in and kind of studying, how did Jesus handle things, and what was his demeanor like? Because the Bible says that we say that we're of him, then we ought to try to be like him, right? We should model that. So back to that verse a minute ago, it says that he was full of grace and truth. So it sounds like he's both. It sounds like he's a good mixture of kindness and relationship mixed with accountability and truth. So anyway, I started off in the book of Matthew, and somebody told me, if you want to know something about Jesus, a good place to start is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, because it's an account of the guys that he used to hang out with. And if you study the Bible and you go read those accounts, it's basically their interpretation of Matthew saying, here's what it's like when I hung out with him, and then John gets a crack at it, and then Mark, and so on. And so, anyway, in the book of Matthew, he gathers all these people, right? And he goes and does what's called the Sermon on the Mount, and he's speaking to them, just kind of telling them, here's what it's like, here's what life is, here's how you ought to be, here's how you ought to live. So I was like, oh, this is great. This is what I need to know. I need to know, how I ought to be. So, but it's a little confusing, and let me explain why. There's a verse in Matthew 5:5 where he says, he's saying lots of things, but one of the things he says is, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. And I'm like, okay, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because when I keep reading in Matthew 6:23, you don't have to put it up yet, but there's a time where they're coming to get Jesus, and the next day, and he turns to Peter. And so Peter's like Jesus' right-hand man, right? And this dude is ready to throw down at any time. That's Peter's demeanor. And Jesus is constantly having to keep him at bay. And he says, they're going to come in a couple days and they're going to take me. And this is how it needs to be. And so Peter immediately gets turned up, nah, nobody's taking you. Not while I'm here. They'll have to go through me first. I'll literally die before I let them take you. And I'm thinking, as I'm reading this, I'm like, okay, that's what's up. This Peter dude is about that justice and that truth and protection. You know what I'm saying? He's on the right path here. And then the next verse, I'm like, I got really taken back, because Jesus turns and snaps at him and confronts Peter and says, you can put it up, Mason. He says, get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block for me. You don't have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. So what he's saying is and let me unpack that a little bit. He's saying you're mistaking my righteous justice for your own. That's actually you. That's what you want. It's not what I want. And it's already hard enough. If you study a little bit more, it was hard for Jesus to go through what he was doing, knowing that he was going to die. It was difficult. It says that he went into the garden and prayed until he sweat so hard that blood came out. That's how intense of an idea it was, that he was going to have to sacrifice his life. So going through that was hard enough. What he couldn't have was his right-hand man, his main dude, pushing him even more towards the flesh. You understand what I'm saying? So he's like, you got to stop, man. I know that you mean good intentions, but this isn't the justice that you think it is. You're making it harder for me. And that's not of God, by the way. That's of the devil. So get behind me, Satan. I was like, man, that was hardcore. I really kind of felt bad for Peter, because reading that verbatim, I probably would have said the exact same thing Peter did and felt good about it. Does that make sense? So anyway, he confronts him, and then, later, there's another time in Psalms where Jesus says, the meek will inherit the land and enjoy peace and prosperity. So I'm confused at this point, because I'm thinking in my head, I've always thought that being meek meant that you're some type of wimp and a pushover, and you're easily taken advantage of, and people can do whatever they want, and they get away with anything around you. And so I'm confused, because earlier he says meek and inherit the earth, but then I see him kind of jump at Peter and confront him like that. And so, I wanted to know more about it. So, in fact, one of the definitions in the dictionary is for meek is overly submissive or compliant, spiritless or tame. And then, like I said, yet Jesus describes himself again in Matthew 11:29, himself as meek and lowly in heart. So yeah, I'm confused. He says he was meek, and then there's another time in the Bible, if you know this, he goes into the temple and he drives out money changers. And these guys are in the temple in his father's house, he says, and they're trying to profit off of the people coming to the temple. And he gets upset about that and kind of rages and tosses their stuff everywhere. So I'm like, all right, these stories don't line up. He keeps saying that he's meek and lowly in heart, but he then he rage dances about people trying to make money in church. So I need to look into this some more. So the reality is there's a vast difference between being meek and being timid. One's a virtue and one is a vice. And if you don't know what a vice is like a flaw. It's a bad thing. It's something that isn't good. So let me explain it a little bit. Someone meek is quiet when they should be, when they get trash talked, when people provoke them, when things aren't fair for them. Meek is quiet. However, meek is loud when asking God for help, when leading their friends through tough situations and encouraging them to seek God for guidance. Loud when having to defend the truths of the gospel openly. Truths like 1 John 3 that says, "See what great love the Father's given us that we should be called children of God." And that's what we are. The reason the world doesn't know us is because they don't know him. Or how about the next truth in Proverbs 31 that says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and the needy." And then this last one, meek is loud when it has to tear the lamb out of the lion's mouth. And that's a line from David speaking to King Saul. And he was talking to him about protection because, that's something that is part of our call as men. It's our job to protect our homes, our children, our wife, but it's also our job to protect our communities and our state and our country, right? So the lesson there, I think, is be careful that in the process of killing the lion that you don't become the lion. And there's a really cool poem that says, "He who fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become one." And that's kind of like my story I was trying to share with you guys. If you're not careful, sometimes when you step out in this position of what you think is justice, you just become more of the same, right? You seek out destroying the one that's attacking the sheep, and in the process you become one. And that was kind of the story for me. I sought out to stop the bullies and stop people getting taken advantage of. And in the process, without even knowing it, became the bully, right? It became the aggressor. And so the idea of meek is still a journey I'm on. I definitely haven't arrived, that's for sure. It's not a posture of power and dominance in the physical, but instead it's a deep understanding of God and his kingdom, of servanthood, of love, so that we can speak up in confidence and confront on behalf of him and what he's called us to do. Confront because you want a person or a situation to be restored, not because you want to rub somebody's face in something or teach them a lesson. You want to school them, and you gotta see that justice gone through. If you really loved and cared about the person, then your goal would be to restore, right? It would be to fix something back to its original purpose, its original intent. It's not to embarrass anybody or to make them, you're going to go teach them a lesson. It's because you really want, down in your heart, you want that situation to be right. You want it to be restored. Confrontation done right is good. It's necessary, in fact. There's a saying, and I modded this slightly, but it's, you can't truly call yourself peaceful unless you're capable of difficult confrontation. If you're not capable of that, then you're not peaceful, you're harmless. There's a big difference. And so I think if I could unpack that a little bit, there's a saying that I talked to the guys about at the men's ministry, and it's from way back in the 1700s, but it says, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." And what does that mean? That means sometimes it's our job as men to wade out things that are happening and know when we need to confront stuff, right? And I think there's a lot of people that really hate confrontation. You'd be surprised how many people, it's like one of their worst fears. They'll do anything not to have to confront somebody. They'll do anything. They'll let people walk all over them. They'll let people take advantage of them. They'll let people get bullied because they're so terrified of confronting somebody. But the reality is you're deceiving yourself sometimes because you think in your head, like, I'm not that kind of person. I'm a real peaceful person. The reality is you might actually just be harmless, and that's not good. You don't want to be harmless, right? You want to be peaceful. Peaceful is when you have the ability to stop something and you don't on behalf of others, right? It's the whole saying of like, be the warrior in the garden, not the gardener in the war, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so this can go, all the way into even the way you tell people about God. Let me give you some examples of this. Like, one of the things I spoke to our team about when we went on our mission trip to Belize was everybody wears these God Has More shirts, and you guys might see that around some. Josh has got one on here. I mean, you see our saying, it's kind of everywhere, and this is sort of like a mission statement for us that we decide to grab onto. And I challenged them with, if you wear that shirt, why do you wear it, and what does that mean to you? And because you should know. There's a verse in 1 Peter that says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But there's an important part on the last part of that verse, and it says, but do this with meekness and respect. And so sometimes I think as Christians, our heart's right. Like we want people to know about God, and we want them to know why we believe. But I think sometimes we're missing that last part of meekness and respect. And if you're not careful, like I said, this thing can very quickly become a weapon to other people. And even though your intentions are great, you do a little too much of inflicting your will, maybe more than you think. You know what I'm saying? Let's get some clapping going. It's been so quiet in here. Give me a minute to think. I'm an amateur, sorry. Okay, so, the reality is that God needs meek leaders. There's a time back in when Moses is leading the Israelites, and if you guys don't know, God chose Moses to do a lot of very important things, right? And if you read in Exodus 32, it says that Moses was very meek, more than all the men who were on the face of the earth. That's a wild statement. He's the most meek dude. And so I really feel like because of that, God was able to really use Moses to do lots of great things for him. Well, one time Moses tells the Israelites, like, hey, y'all, they were wild. They were doing stuff all the time. He's like, listen, y'all just relax. I'm going to go up into the mountain. I'm going to talk to God, and I'm going to come back. Just chill till I get back. And they're like, got it. We will all chill. So he goes up the mountain and gets the 10 Commandments. And it says he literally comes off the mountain like glowing because he had spent so much time like personally with God. So you got this dude spending all this time with God, and the Israelites start wilding out while he's gone. They're like, all right, he's been gone longer than 10 minutes. Let's go get the calf. So they get golden calves, and they're down there worshiping idols and stuff, and Moses gets mad, and he spikes the 10 Commandments and shatters them, it says. And God later on says, because you did this, Moses, you broke faith with me in the presence of the Israelites, and so I can't let you come into the promised land because you did that. I mean, God was upset with him, and the reality was that Moses thought he was defending God's honor, right? He really did. But the reality was that he was defending his. He was defending his honor in that moment, and he broke character. And there's another verse in Ephesians 4:26, and it says, be angry and sin not. So it doesn't mean that if you decide to follow God and become a Christian that you're not going to get angry ever again, because you're gonna. There's always going to be that guy hanging his head out the window, trash talking you, saying that you're this and that. And you may have a moment where you decide this guy needs to get hit. He needs to quit running his mouth. And, but it's like it says, be angry and sin not. That means people are going to make you upset. That still doesn't justify you going out and doing that, especially on behalf of God. Does that make sense? It's not okay to get personally offended and then take this and weaponize it and say that on behalf of God, I'm going to go correct something. When the reality is you're swinging it for you. Be honest. Don't make God look bad. That's the deal with Moses. Just to talk about Jesus for a minute, because Jesus really was the ultimate model of humility and meekness. And it says in Philippians that Jesus, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. And that's kind of what I'm talking about here. It's using that power to your own advantage. Because the reality was that Jesus had the right to do anything he wanted. If he's God, he has ultimate power, ultimate flexibility. And even the people that were kind of watching him go through the crucifixion and watching him get tortured, even they tempted him to flex. And they tempted him to stand out on his behalf instead of the Father's. Stand on his behalf and take up. And this is in Luke 23. It says, and the people stood looking on, but even the rulers with them sneered, saying, he saved others, let him save himself if he's the Christ, the chosen of God. The soldiers also mocked him, coming and offering him sour wine and saying, "If you are the king of the Jews, then save yourself." And Jesus said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Having said this, breathed his last. And this last verse is the important line, so when the centurion saw what happened, he glorified God, saying, "Certainly that was a righteous man." Certainly anybody that can handle someone getting in their face like that and trash talking them when they're on death's door, and instead anyway can turn and bless them, that it has to be a man of God. It has to be. And sometimes this is something I say to the guys that are, how we react sometimes preaches more than our words. And, there's a saying that says, preach the gospel at all times, and if necessary, use words. And so what that means is, and this is something I challenge our staff with all the time, like, it's cool. Everything's really cool as long as people are listening to you and you're allowed to have influence over them and they do what you say. The real question is, how do you act when they tell you no? When you have no influence and you ask them something and they tell you no and they spit in your face, how do you act? Because that sometimes tells a lot about your character and it tells a lot about who you follow, right? So I'm going to close in just a minute, but I think a lot of people would ask me this question, like, how do I know if I'm doing it right? Like, I hear what you're saying, but how do I know when I'm in the right frame of mind, if it's me and I'm being tilted, or if I really am, how is it worded? If you're from a position of God where you have zeal and righteous anger, like it said Jesus did in the temple, how do you know the difference? And my answer to that is, first off, I want to talk about Matthew 7:15, and it says, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they're ravenous wolves." And it says, "You'll know them by their fruits." And what he's talking about, he's using trees as a reference. He's saying, like, you might look at a lot of trees and go, what are these? And the answer is, well, come back in a few months and I'll tell you. Because if it's an orange tree, there'll be oranges on that tree in a couple of months. And if it's a lemon tree, there'll be lemons on it. Whatever that tree is, it will bear whatever fruit it actually is. Does that make sense? So this is the same for us. Like, this is a challenge for us. Like, a good telltale sign of what you're doing and the motions and the movements that you're going through, what kind of results are they producing? What are the fruits in your life? Because you can easily think that you're functioning on behalf of God, but the reality is you could be one of these false prophets that are in sheep's clothing if you're not careful. And you need to step back and judge the fruit of what you're doing. And I really believe, this is something I talk about a lot, but is your truth or justice is it producing frustration or is it producing life? And, when I was back in, I used to edit the TV show a long time ago. I've been here 15 years. So we used to be on Channel 39, like 2:30 in the morning or something like that. And I was, if you guys don't know, Pastor Al is our founding pastor. He founded this church back in the 70s, and he used to be on TV all the time. And I would edit. One of the things he said that always stuck out to me was he said that the Spirit of God woke him up one night and told him something, and then he's followed it with, well, you might ask, how do I know? How do I know that that's God? And he said, because it brought me great life. Like, anything that's from God brings you life, and you feel it in your spirit. Your spirit connects in a different way, right? And that's a good sign. That's something that you follow. That's an indicator, as opposed to what our flesh does sometimes. When we make moves out of our flesh, sometimes it ends at the road of frustration. And I'm using that word because it means a lot of things. Frustration means confusion, uncertainty, anxiety. A lot of people feel anxiety or fear, Those are all signs of frustration. And so I really believe that you can confront and have life come out of it. If you make God part of what you're doing, you can confront people with difficult issues and confront things that are not right. And if you really are paired with God, like that verse I said in the beginning, where it says we're supposed to be Christ-like, so that's full of grace and truth, both. Remember that sometimes truth can be destructive if it's alone. If it's just truth, it can cause damage, a lot of damage. Even if you're right, you might be totally right. But if you come swinging the sword like that, and so I skipped the real definition, which I was afraid of. This is why I have notes, because I'm a note skipper. But the real definition of meek is, hold on, let me make sure I'm reading it Yeah, here we go. Okay, it comes from the Greek root word called Preyas, and it refers to mildness, gentleness of spirit, or humility. And written out next to that is, meek is having the right or the power to do something, but refraining for the benefit of someone else. It's having the capacity for great power. It's having the sword, but not unsheathing it, right? And so it's out of a position or a compassion for somebody else. So that's the reality of it's a mixture of truth, the justice that you bring, but it's tempered and mixed with grace, right? And your compassion for people. And if you really are confronting people and trying to correct things and make them better, you can do that from a position where you partner with God. And I'm going to close with this last story of a time when this happened with me. And you guys have heard this before, I think, and maybe saw some photos, but I'm going to tell it anyway. But in 2005, I don't know, if you guys don't know, we have a gymnasium back here, and it's pretty big. They built it back in '05, and they put really nice bleachers in it. I mean, these were like college grade level bleachers, and it was a big company that put them in. I mean, they do huge, like, stadiums full of seats, so they're professional, nice stuff. Well, after, 5 to 7 years, the seats started to kind of break down one at a time, so Pastor Rod was looking over them at the time, and he would just kind of go a seat at a time and swap them out, no big deal. We were just buying them from that company, and they would send them to us. Well, after a while, he was buying like cases at a time. Like they were all kind of busted. And he was like, there's got to be something wrong. Well, anyway, years go by of him going back and forth with these people. And finally, in 2017, a kid ran up him, and they cracked and split his leg open. He's bleeding everywhere. And they really were starting to become a hazard. And so by 2019, if you throw that picture up, Mason, they can see. They look kind of like that. If you can see, like they have the consistency of a Dorito chip. And so this is like a serious liability, right? Like I'm now concerned as the person that's ultimately responsible for that someone's going to get legitimately hurt, and we're having tournaments. I mean, we're having tournaments as we speak. We got people over there. And so it's a big deal. It's a health liability. And so I'm pretty upset, at this point, because I feel like this company should be taking way more ownership in what they're doing over there. And they're not. So Rod's like, hey, man, this is a serious problem. He sends them a sample, and that's what they looked like in 2019. So I'm still on my story. I skipped ahead. I'm back in 2017. He sends them a sample of the seat so they can test it, and they're like, yes, the seats seem a little weird, a little bit off, so what we'll do is we'll give you half price. Well, that ain't good to me, because there's 582 seats in that room, and those seats are not cheap. We're talking about 20 grand worth of seating. And we're way past warranty at this point, and so I'm ready to write an email to these people and give them the truth, right? Because that's my thing. And so I sit down and I type out my version of the email. And this version of the email to the CEO guy, or the guy we were dealing with, is basically just all me, no God, right? Just me in the email. And I'm kind of flaming the dude a little bit, like, you ought to know better. How dare all of you? And I stepped back for a little bit and was like, I got it all out. Now I need to step back a minute, and I need to pray about this. You know what I mean? Because I need something supernatural to happen. We're obviously past warranty. These people don't really owe us anything technically. So I need something supernatural to happen. And I remember studying that Jesus was full of grace and truth, and he says that God is the God that fills in the gaps, right? So if maybe I'm real strong in the truth lane, but I'm real weak in that grace side. And sometimes I have a problem having empathy and compassion for people, but here's the good news is that when you link up with God, it's a supernatural thing where he makes you whole. Does that make sense? So he can take and fill in that rest, the part where you're weak, he can fill that in and make you a balanced person. And now you come into a situation where you're both. It's not just you anymore. It's not just your talents and skills that he gave you, but it's his. And so I wrote that first email tilted, where it was just me writing it. And you could tell, if you went back and read it, it was a little rude. So anyway, I stepped away and prayed about it, and then I came back and wrote it again. And I prayed that God would help me have the correct grace, because the reality was that it was the wrong play to try to make these people eat crow and make them understand the severity of their lack of compassion for this situation. And I wanted them to feel that. Like, I wanted them to kind of like rub their nose in it, you know, let them know like people are getting hurt and killed out here. And I thought like, that's not really what I want though. What I want is for the situation to be restored. That's really what I want. I want us to have new bleachers in the room so that we can have tournaments over there and nobody gets injured. That's the reality. So what's the real restoration of that situation? So I rewrote the email and took some lines out. And keep in mind, this is the first time that I've personally ever communicated with these people ever. And so I don't know if it was a combination of the email being good or just them getting tired of annoying us, but I said it kind of like this. I said, you know, I understand that we're past warranty and this is a time where you could definitely walk away, but I'm going to ask something wild. I'm going to ask that you guys not only replace all 582 seats, but I'm going to ask that you pay for the shipping and that you send a team down to install them. I need you to do all of it because I think it's the right play. And I think you do too. And like 2 days later, I get an email with a guy saying, I spoke to my supervisor regarding your concerns and have been authorized to order all 582 and schedule a team to come and replace them. So, yeah, that's awesome. And I have to give God credit for that. It's not like I did anything. All I did was take a minute to pair my truth with his grace. You understand what I'm saying? And this works on both sides of the coin too. You know, I talked about that confrontation earlier. Like you might be more of a grace-tilted person, you know, where you have empathy, but you might be at a time in history right now where maybe you need to bring that truth more into your life and have some boundaries with some things that you're going to stand for and some things that you're not going to be okay with. And even though you are an empathy-based person, remember that God will help bring that truth to your life, and he can show you things that ought to be a certain way, and you can make sure that when you go swinging swords that it's actually God, not you. Does that make sense? And that when you go do confront, that it is really something that God wants, not just your own personal agenda. So yes, the meek will inherit the earth. That's the theme. The meeks, the warriors in the garden, right? And in today's Father's Day, so that's a charge to all the guys out there to measure what you're doing and make sure that it is your responsibility to protect the garden. It's your job to keep the snakes out. But make sure that, you know, the next time you go and talk to your son or your daughter, let me make this practical, that you know, it's real easy as a father sometimes to get annoyed and bothered, and your kid won't stop talking to you. And so you want to just lash out and smack them around sometimes. But make sure that you come at those situations in your life, or with your wife even, that you make sure that you're from a position of meekness. And remember to weigh the two and make sure that you're not, what you're saying might be totally true. But remember that if it ends in frustration, that it probably is a good sign that was you making moves for you. And God's called us to be like him. So when you go and you pair up with God, you'll be able to confront difficult things and fix situations and remove snakes from the garden. But in the process, like I said earlier, make sure that whoever fights monsters in the process doesn't become one, right? And so God, like I said, God is the one that can fill in all the gaps. And maybe you're here today and this is the first time you're hearing about this Christ character, and you hearing these, you know, church people say that that's how you ought to be like, and I want you to know that that's okay. It's okay. God meets you wherever you're at. There's no arriving. Everybody in this room is messy. Everybody. And that's the good thing about the gospel, is that it's an unearned gift. There's no achieving it. All you have to do is say that you want God to come and be a part of your life and link with you, and he'll do that. This is a free, unearned gift of salvation. And so I want you to know that that's available for anybody, even if you're watching online. Like, that's available for you too. You can be right where you're at, and all you got to say is, God, come and be a part of my life, and I accept that gift of salvation. And I want to be measured, God, in my life where I'm at, and I want to spend my life trying to walk with you as my role model. You know, not me. I need a good role model. And so I want to pray for everybody in the room and people watching online that if you want to make that decision, it's easy. All you have to do is ask. So let me pray, and then I'll dismiss you guys. Father, thank you for these people that have set aside time, God, to come out and pursue things of you and your kingdom and your habits and your ways, God, and we're grateful, God, that you're the God that fills all in, and even though we're weak, and you gave us talents in some ways, God, and we're weak in others, that you can fill in all the gaps, that you're the God that fills it all in, and you know what our needs are. And so I want to pray for the people in this room, God, that you help them go about their week, and when they go to confront or they go to distribute grace, God, that you make sure that it's a measure of both, just like you, Father, that you were full of grace and truth, both. And that we go out and we represent you well, Father, to the world, because that's our responsibility. And people are looking to us when we talk about this Christ guy. They're looking at us, and they're seeing, like, what is he like? How does he act when people tell him no? How does he act? Does he love them anyway? And we're grateful, God, to be able to serve you on a day like this, to be able to come in this room together and unify and say that that's what we stand for, God. And for all those people out there that maybe don't know you at all, like, this is a good time. All you have to say is God, I accept the gift. I accept the gift of salvation, and I want you to be a part of my life. And that's it. That God says if you call in his name, that you're saved. And so it says that the heavens celebrate anytime people accept this gift. And so thank you, Father, for that. Thank you for our time together, God. Thank you for protection in these times that we're going through right now. Protection for everybody, God. All sides of the fence, all around. Protection for everyone. And thank you. Bless these people. Give them a good week, God. We do these things in your name, Father. Amen.
Well, thank you for watching with us. We hope you enjoyed the message today. We always want to give you an opportunity to be a part of what God's doing here. So if you'd like to give, please text LS Church to 77977 or just head to our website. And please stop by on Sundays at 10:30 a.m. if you're ever in our area. Again, happy Father's Day. We love you, and we hope that you'll join us again next week.